so we'll just have to be mindful of the time. Can I go ahead and get a motion to approve the September 2nd, 2020 minutes?
I move to approve.
I second.
Thank you. Were there any comments or questions regarding the minutes? All right, if there's none, then we'll go ahead and consider those minutes approved. So the next item on our agenda is the resolution. Councilmember Stewart's on the line with us today. So, excuse me. If you recall, we were provided with a resolution brought forward by Councilmember Stewart. You guys have had an opportunity to take a look at that resolution, review it, provide comment. We discussed it a little bit at the last meeting. Some of the comments that were made was that you wanted to have a little bit of direction for the purpose, why now, for some of the questions that you guys had for Councilmember Stewart. So did you guys want to pose those questions to him directly, or how would you like to move forward with that dialogue?
Hi, good morning.
The first question. Go ahead.
Are you okay? Councilman Stewart, nice to finally meet you, at least virtually in person.
Nice,
Appreciate
nice
you.
to meet you as well.
Yes. I would, if the group would agree, I would love to just kind of hear your thought process and the impetus behind it. Just kind of educate us on the origination of the resolution. That might be helpful.
Okay, so thank you all for having me on the meeting today and considering the resolution. So for full disclosure, I am a police officer in another jurisdiction. So this is something that is kind of near and dear to my heart. The idea kind of came up when, after a conversation with one of my constituents, and he wouldn't reveal who the officers were, but he had a conversation with some police officers on a call in our city that, morale, their morale was low. I mean, is what, he was, telling me, and that's where the idea kind of came up. So I just thought, it would be nice to, give a resolution in support of our law enforcement officers. I listened to your full meeting a month ago, and I agreed with some of the stuff you said, and I disagreed. For the most part, I actually agreed, and I'll tell you why, because I don't remember who brought it up. It may have been a couple of people. They were basically like, what's your end game? And when I really thought about it, my end game is really simple. To show independence is different. And with, everything going on in the country, you're right. It probably wasn't a good idea to include all of that, because it was kind of politically charged after I really thought about it. So I have went back and I made, you see, there's a lot of changes that have been made. It basically references independence specifically, because independence is the one I want to show that's different from the rest of the, country. So, and that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Councilmember. So as far as the committee goes, I know you guys, like I said, you guys have received the revised version as well. What are your comments, questions, concerns regarding the revised version?
I believe I responded and again, thanks, Councilman Stewart, for joining us. The only thing that I would like to see changed, possibly worded differently, would be Section 3, where the first one says that the city council conveys its grief for every officer who has been lost in the line of duty while still being troubled by cases of police overreach across the country, and encourages citizens to utilize communication and understanding, not violence, to address these matters. The changes I made were towards the end and encourages citizens and police officers to utilize communication and understanding, not violence, to address these matters. And so just the addition to not only say citizens, but also police officers.
Okay, I actually had not seen that, but I actually like that. So we can definitely make that change.
Okay.
And Councilman Stewart, this is Nina Falls speaking. Section 3, I had sent it over originally, not this past time, where it says police overreach across the country and encourages citizens to utilize communication and understanding. I don't think violence has to be brought up in there. I would just stop it at citizens to utilize communication and understanding to address these matters. I think violence is a word that didn't need to be used in something that's uplifting people. And since there hasn't been any violence here in Independence, since you said that this is an independence document, I don't even think it needs to be mentioned.
Okay,
The word
I agree.
violence.
I agree with that as well. We can make that change.
I still don't know about the timing of this. I think we are in a divisive time with COVID, with the protests that we have seen around the nation and close by in Kansas City, with the election coming up. There's just a lot of hostility going on right now. And I know you saw in our last meeting, you know, Independence has been different. Detective Virgil and other police officers have been very open and honest about things and want things to be better. And I think that there's a really good building up of community and togetherness here. And I still think that something like this will come across to certain populations within Independence as not being supportive of them. Now, I support the police. I'm very thankful for the police. I think they do a great job. I think there's, you know, room for improvement in some areas, just like in all of us, we all have room to improve. So I know as a police officer, this is really important to you. So I get that. And I just don't know if having this specific just for police officers is the right timing for this, just because I think it can cause more problems than needed. I think there may be another way to show support to the police officers. I think it was Meredith had an idea of showing some support for all first responders together, because then that doesn't drive a feeling as much of divisiveness, because there's lots of first responders that are doing things. My husband is actually a licensed professional counselor and got COVID this year, but one of his coworkers had COVID. And she is still suffering from things from it. Like, it's really sad, and she's young. And so it's just, so there's that more feeling, like, I feel like that's more of would boost morale for people that are all responding to all the situations we're going on this year, because it's been a rough year for a lot of us. And so my opinion is that it's still not the right timing, or if it was more embracive of some other first responders, it may be more uplifting and morale boosting within Independence.
So let me ask you a question. How would you feel if we, and I agree with you to a certain extent, if I had two resolutions, one for, I don't know. And when you say first responders, I guess that's a broad thing. I was going to say firefighters. Anyway, I can try to work something out with that. I was going to say two different resolutions, but I guess it would require more than two for all first responders. So, okay. All right. Thank you.
And I think as a member of this task force, I definitely want to give credence and value to your voice, Councilman Stewart. I would love to hear, and I hate to put Virgil on the spot, or even John. I think we've done a really good job locally of really addressing at the lowest level, the grassroots level, if there is an issue, if there's unrest, or if there's lack of clarity. we do a really good job of bringing people to the table. So in events where there has been episodes of trauma in response to events, IPD has been more than responsive to its officers' needs through respective departments that help them navigate through some of that trauma, some of that feeling of disenfranchisement, disconnection, that lack of support. And so we do a really good job of being trauma-informed and trauma-responsive. And I think what I'm hearing others say and what I'm hearing Casey say, and I read the tone and the nature, and I'm trying to think of if I were an officer, I can't even imagine, but if this were me and I were on the other side of the coin, I would want my voice, my experience to still have weight and value. And as a woman of color who historically has felt through her children, through her parents, through her grandparents' lens, my life was not valued. My children's lives were not valued. And I'm not talking about officers, just in generally. And having that sense of weight and that heaviness all throughout my life, I would want somebody to validate me. And the argument could be made, the Black Lives Matter movement, the race conversations, the equity conversations could be just a very loud lauding of emphasizing that those lives matter, so that causes law enforcement officers in particular to feel underseen, undervalued, and don't know that that's the case, but I can imagine just human emotions, that's how officers feel. So I'm trying to think of what would I want to hear from an authoritative body, from my city, from my council that says I matter, my work matters, what I do matters. So I guess I'm asking the law enforcement officers on the line, you know, what does that look like? Does this feel like that for you? Do we need to put on a different lens and try to see it from your perspective? And I'm asking really you to be very transparent and honest, because even if I took my woman of color hat off and I'm trying to be more, let's make longer tables and lower the fences, when I read language like warriors in the battle against crime, when I read language like troubled by cases of police overreach, my mind as a constituent just naturally draws a parallel between my national landscape and my local landscape, and the two just have no communion with each other. It feels to me echoing of a narrative coming from an administration that is very divided and that is very hurtful to a large group of people right now. And I don't want us to get lost in that conversation. I don't want us to get involved in that mix. So all that long-windedness to say, I'd love to hear from the voice and heart of the officers of what you feel you need to hear globally, locally, what would make you feel valued and validated by your council and your staff or this committee. Is this it? Do we need to take a second look?
Well, first of all, thank you, Meredith. I think you always say things far better than I ever could. And I think you covered like the whole gamut of the feelings that us in law enforcement are dealing with right now. In short, I just want to say that obviously I'm a minority officer myself too, is we want to be, officers want to be understanding of how other minorities are feeling, what the feeling is behind like Black Lives Matters. But there's a part of us that every time we hear that, it's almost saying like we don't matter or that we're doing something wrong. And so it's a catch-22. It's hard. We want to be embracive, but it also feels like it's attacking us at the same time. I can tell you, I read the resolution. It's sad, but honestly, if I'm just gonna be honest, the one thing I could read that whole thing, but then it lost me when it talked about police overreach. And as soon as I read that, it made me believe. It made me feel that. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying to do the best way to explain this. I feel that the spirit of law enforcement, that 99.9% of us are out here for the right reasons, doing the right thing. But when you hear something like police overreach, it makes me think that people still assume that it's like a 50-50 game, like half of us are good and half of us are bad. And so I don't know what the best way to get something out there. I will say that I know that the this police department specifically, when talked about like morale, and I think that most police departments have a low morale right now, just because it's a challenging time to be a police officer in this nation, and we are the same. We're struggling to hire new officers. We're shorthanded. Every day we show up to work, we are shorthanded. So I don't know how to increase our morale. I don't know that this resolution is going to do it. But the city, the officers do want to know that the city is behind it. There's a reason why we're not in the limelight like a lot of these other cities, is because I think that we have great leadership and we've done things the best that we can. But yet it's one of those things that doesn't get recognized when you do things the best that you can. We're only going to get recognized when we do something wrong. And so, again, I know that's a long-winded answer, but it's my way of saying that I don't know what the right answer is. I know that we do want, the police department as a body does want to make sure that the city is, that we feel that the city is standing behind us. I just don't know the best way to do it. So, John, maybe you can help me clarify some of that.
Can I at least say before the clarification, Officer Virgil, if I was an officer, I would feel the same way you feel. And I am a person that I cry and I feel sad every time I see someone killed. So I actually see all sides of this. And sometimes when you just pull out one separation of people, even the officers deserve this. This should have happened even before all of these things happened. We should have had a resolution. But maybe this is what should happen to, make everyone feel valued. I think all the things at the end in Section 3 is just not really worded well for many people. And so take a look at what everyone has said on Section 3. But I think if we're going to do resolutions, maybe in the future, you should do a resolution for the citizens of Independence. It's a lot of people disenfranchised. Right now, of course, we're for African-American sons. I'm going to be affected by I'm going to cry every time I see something on TV that looks like it could happen to my child. So I can't stop that. And you can't stop. You're going to be sad and possibly cry every time someone in the police department is injured or so-called devalued. I've never not valued the police department. I really believe that we have an excellent police department, even though I've always heard of things happening. But that's just, it's bad actors in every group of people. But if we're going to do resolutions in Independence, I think we should do them for everyone. So maybe have a citizens resolution. I know, and then ask maybe this group to help kind of write that. So people feel like they did a resolution for the citizens too. And our police officers, make everybody part of the change game. Because if you do one group or whatever in these trying times, whether it's an Independence trying time or not, for some people, it's still, even if no one opens their mouth, they still feel like, yeah, but it's not about us, but that's true. We should support our officers. It still feels like low. It doesn't feel uplifting to people that are poor. It doesn't feel uplifting to people that, the skateboarders. It may not feel uplifting to them. I think we could do two. And still do an excellent one for the police department and an excellent one for disenfranchised citizens and non-disenfranchised citizens, whoever you think. We have such a great place we live in. We're small enough. We're big enough. We can do two. It won't happen at the same time. But if the policeman is moved forward in an excellent way, I think you can do one for citizens in an excellent way too.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Stewart, does that help you any as far as the dialogue that we've had today to move forward with this resolution or potentially multiple resolutions?
Yes, it does help me.
Okay, so if does anyone else have any questions or comments I'd like to add to this discussion?
The only thing I'd like to say real quick to the councilman is as a police officer here in Independence, we thank you for your support. And it is helpful to know that we've got people on our council that are standing behind us. So we appreciate you.
Thank you.
I wanted to echo that and say that something like this that shows the support of this from the city council to the police department. I think the police officers would really like to see something like this. Their jobs are extremely difficult, more so recently with everything going on, but also with our low personnel numbers right now. We have numerous vacancies. Our officers are out there working harder every day. They're responding to more calls for service, and the need is great for them. So I personally would not go into detail in trying to pick apart any nuances or details of this. I don't think that's not my role as a police officer, as a city employee either. So I'm appreciative of anything coming from the city council that supports the Independence Police Department.
The only last comment I'll make is, again, flipping the lens for me is so invaluable. And I have a whole new understanding, I think, of the purpose behind Councilman Stewart's resolution. I would offer that if he's willing, not that any of the narrative I would suggest, I would love to maybe just recommend a couple of either insertions or changes. And I think what I'm hearing is the tone. When I read it, it laments loss to me, which is still heavy on officers' hearts. But I think this has the power to be something that is uplifting, encouraging, refortifying to our police department, who's feeling the strain and pull from every direction. And I'd love to see it be more empowering, uplifting than it is kind of talking about the circle of trauma. But I understand that that's equally important and has great weight. So if you're willing, I'd love to just give a couple of line options and feel free, you don't have to circle back with me or even respond. I would just love to just offer suggestions for your consideration as you finalize the resolution. And I can email you.
Absolutely. You can either forward them, you can either email me directly to the city address, which I think you can get from Becky, or you can just forward them to her and she can get them to me.
Okay.
Thank you.
And Councilman Stewart, I don't know if you saw the chat, but I think after hearing Detective Virgil, I think, and echoing what Meredith said a little bit, is I think if we focus on the things that Independence does instead of doing the broader, like the loss, like Meredith mentioned, but the details of like communicating and willing to listen and the hard work that Independence specifically does, I think that it would be a more powerful and less divisive resolution. So if you look in the chat, there's a couple things there. And I just think that after what Detective Virgil said, just hearing like, and thinking back to the things that we keep saying too, like we know that the IPD works hard and they do lots of great things for our community. And so just highlighting those more than more of the national narrative that's going on, which some in that resolution, even though it's kind of directed more at IPD, it's like, it's still kind of that narrative and not specific to what is going on with IPD. And maybe we can somehow get IPD more money so they can get more officers.
Well, as any other officer out here would know, a lot of times it's not about money. There's a lot of other reasons we can't get more officers. So academy of classes are not as full as they used to be. I think they've dropped like 50%. You know, just it's a job a lot of people don't want to do right now. They want to become a fireman, really. So there's a lot to it, but yeah, I agree. We definitely need to get them some more officers. So thank you all.
Anyone else? All right, well, thanks so much, Councilmember Stewart, for joining us today, and we can circle back around and making the edits to that resolution whenever you have time. So we can schedule a time. I'll email you after this meeting's over.
Hey, Becky, is there a way to like save the chats or something to get them off of there? Is that possible?
I don't know if they're saved in GoToMeeting, but I know if you go back and you watch the video on YouTube, they pop up on the video on YouTube as well. But
Okay.
I should be able to copy and paste them from here if there's not an actual chat log in the platform.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
So that takes us into our next item on the agenda, which is the IPD social media. I assume John Syme, that's why you've joined us. So I'll let you kind of take the wheel on that. So some of the questions, and I think the questions were posed by Meredith, if you wanted to go ahead and just reframe those questions while he's on the line with us to see if you can get some clarification on that, and then we can start the dialogue.
For sure. So John, again, appreciate your time this morning, and I've appreciated spending time with you offline and in our chamber. I think we did the lead thing together. So definitely have a vantage point of IPD and your constant pressure to stay on top of information, use the public's help in identifying and capturing suspects. Like, definitely understand the PIO media role, probably not as fully for IPD. So as I'm getting more and more eyes, I think from a social services perspective, and again, I can hear kind of Virgil and Turner in my mind, like in the back of my head, we have some serious criminals in Independence, and that is well known. And there's some serious crime that sometimes doesn't even surface, and we'd probably be frightened out of our wits if we knew what really existed sometimes. So we understand that there are true hardened criminal activity happening here. We also are trying to balance this new narrative and wave towards a more inclusive community, not even talking just about people of color, but those marginalized communities, those populations, those people who just happen to be those who struggle with substance and drug abuse, with sexual addictions, with other things that get caught up and unfortunately are just living life out in the general public, committing crimes or maybe being victims of crime. And just how we classify them, how we talk about them, how we protect them, even in their criminal state. And so there's just been, I think in the last couple of years, just some posts that they weren't all people of color. I don't know their backgrounds or their stories, but you could definitely just, if you were going to classify the group of people, you could just tell by appearance that they were the rut of life or going through the rut of life right now. And so then I kind of unfolded the comments and the dialogue underneath. And I guess my first question is just, can you talk to us about really the use of whether it be a suspect, a confirmed suspect, someone who's been detained, someone who's been charged, what's the purpose and use of any kind of profile photo on social media? And then what's that filter or discernment for the dialogue and the chat that happens underneath? Because again, it's not your fault, it's not yours to control, but in a national landscape where people just feel free to spew hate from every direction, they will. And so folks who don't necessarily subscribe to this mentality and collaboration that we are trying to get to, our city social media sites and pages can be a platform for them to do that. And I know you're responsible and responsive to try to filter those and stop those when you see them, but some have become increasingly hurtful, just representing all people. So just wanted to see if you could cover those two things for us.
Sure. So it sounds like you're starting off, it's a procedural question, why do we do certain things and the purpose of them. We do have a social media policy. We have our own police department social media policy. The city also has a social media policy. I believe ours was actually formed before the city had one because we took advantage of using social media to directly contact our citizens. I think it's been a great tool over the years. I know our Facebook page, we started in 2011. I think this week actually we'll have our 9-year anniversary on the Facebook page. And I use it as a way, we use it as a way to directly contact our citizens, but it's also a way to directly contact the news media. By putting some of the information out there, both Facebook and Twitter, it goes directly to our news sources. They monitor. Within minutes of putting a tweet out, I can get a phone call from a news station, asking follow-up questions, and that happens all the time. When it comes to posed mugshots that we put out, we'll put out surveillance photos. If I have a detective who's working an open investigation and say it's a fraud case and there's a gas station video surveillance footage, the crime analyst will have that information, and if the detective feels it's necessary, like you said, there's so many things going on, so they decide priority wise which ones they want to put out. The likelihood of usability for that photograph of identifying someone, they'll send it my way to disseminate. If the person's not been charged, the only reason we would put it out to the public would be to identify them or to locate them. We have missing persons. We frequently put out, if we have a silver alert, we'll put a photo. Oftentimes it's a driver's license photo or a family photo that's given to us. The only time we put suspect photos are when we've had a felony charge, or if there's something that's a case of community importance. But I haven't seen one of those in a long time. So if you go back on our Facebook page, the ones that I can think of are going to be posed photographs of someone who's been charged through Jackson County. And that is going to be a felony case. And those are only ones when the Jackson County prosecutor's office actually does their own press release. So if they put a press release out, it has a link and it'll say so-and-so is charged with murder. Now, the purpose of the mugshot, other than the visual nature of Facebook in that no one will see it if you don't put a photograph on things, that's how the algorithm really works. But my purpose of putting it out there is to get that directly to the news media, because otherwise I'm bombarded with phone calls and emails saying, hey, we want that mugshot, we want that mugshot. And then they end up on the news that night. So that's a visual for the media. And I absolutely agree. The comment section gets ridiculously out of hand. But I always have to remind myself, we're a government Facebook page. We have record retention issues. We have censorship issues. I can set profanity filters high, but I can't go in there and remove them. So it's a struggle. I mean, we get people posting links to things that are completely unrelated. If something's repetitive and like a spam thing, we've been able to remove them, but there's been a real gray area on court cases when it comes to social media and government use. There was a pretty big case out of Honolulu where the local government was sued because they were censoring, they were removing posts and comments that they didn't like. So we do not do that. We always are very careful, and anything that we've had to remove, whether they be a death threat towards an officer, which we've seen that a lot, we screenshot those and we keep them on file. So there's evidence of that. But the other day, someone made a comment on something when we had a homicide victim, and there were some nasty comments there, and someone emailed me and they said, hey, can you remove these comments? And I mean, something was a Bible verse that someone used with their interpretation of a person's lifestyle, and I can't remove that. I wouldn't be able to, as a government person, I couldn't censor that. So I'm glad we're talking about this, and I think it's good that you brought this to our attention. And I think it's something that we need to really think about it, as a police department, when we put a photograph of someone out there. But as far as those posed mugshots, those are to get it out to the public, because that is part of the story. That's the part of the story that the newspaper wants, the TV stations want to put on there. Does that make sense?
It is.
Can I add,
oh yeah, go
can
ahead.
I add a couple things real quick? Having helped John with the media stuff prior to this assignment, a couple things that I like to add is that, one, the importance of us being able to put it out on social media. It allows us to actually insert our narrative before the media does. Because in the media, they don't have to follow our narrative, but they're going to be questioned a lot more if they just spill something out that's not true or doesn't follow the lines of what we said. It gives us it like a base, right? So I think it's really important that we get the jump on getting the facts out there before it gets spun around a little bit or influenced by something. Second of all, like I think it was Casey that said that, maybe that we're all a little naive to like some of the horrendous crime that happens in Independence or some of the hardened criminals that we have. The way I look at it, I think it actually gives us some support. If we didn't put out there some of the bad people that we deal with, and I can tell you, we put out maybe 1/10 of the bad guys that we really deal with out here, especially like in the unit that I'm in now. We're constant. It seems like every day we're taking down a dangerous felon. If we didn't have that out there, people might say, well, Independence doesn't need that kind of money. We don't have dangerous crime in Independence. I think it's the best way to get it out there that we do. and here's an example of what's going on. And like I said, I think it would be frightful, and we don't want to paint a gloomy image of independence if we put out every hardened criminal that we put away, because then people wouldn't want to live here. We want people to realize that this is a safe, neighborly community. But I think it is important to put out some of that so that people realize when we say we're short 30 officers, the importance of us being short 30 officers and how we need to change that. People might not be as willing to come along if they thought that we were all happy-go-lucky and didn't have that kind of crime in our city.
I also want to add that if you see a posed mugshot of someone charged with a crime, it's not because little Johnny was accused of stealing candy from a store. I know there are some small agencies really small agencies, who will put, every time they arrest someone, we went down to Earl's house and arrested him for domestic violence and put his face. We never do that. We will put someone is being accused and is going to court on a very serious offense if their mugshot's on there. Murder first degree, serious felony child abuse, something that is a case of community importance, and a press release has already gone out from that Jackson County Prosecutor's Office.
I do want to say thank you to the police for something that came over, and it would be like a social media thing. Some people near the Crispin neighborhood, they've been tagged their houses, and I know people think, oh, that's a small thing. But if you're targeted and tagged your house and you're African American, you don't know who did that. And that can be a really violent thing if you're older, and a lot of people are older over there. So I want to thank, and that came up on our ring, people talk in this neighborhood. So I guess that's social media and it's working for us. But thank you for, even though that seems small to many people, the police said they're on top of it and they are looking to the persons that did it, because, people don't know, especially if they're older. So I just want to thank you all for doing that. We really do appreciate it, because that may look small until someone dies because their house was tagged. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your support. And then you actually bring up another great example of why we need the social media outlet. If we have something like that is specifically targeting multiple people in our community, and they're demanding action and want results, or they're terrified, and we want to give them some reassurance, John being able to post something, because even though we might get 100 phone calls on a situation, we don't keep track of all those people, and we might reach out to a couple, but then once they're satisfied, they don't reach out to other people to share the good news. This is a good way to quell something that's happened in a community and get answers out there to everybody, as opposed to leaving some people left out of a community situation like the one you just described.
So I thank you both, John and Officer Virgil, for answering those questions. I think that definitely clarifies some of the original things I had. This is just an observation that I don't know that necessarily needs any feedback, but to Councilman Stewart's point, I would love to see, and I know it's happening, before COVID, we were getting together as a kind of interagency collaborative roundtable. Diversity and inclusion was getting together, and there were officers at the table. I know that's not a sexy photo, because nobody wants to read a narrative about people meeting, but I would love to see more of those short clips, stories, photos of the collaboration that happens behind the scenes. They may not necessarily be event related now because of COVID. I love to see the partnership with the ponies and the officers, with the family and CSL, and all those are great. I'd love to see that in between. That's not necessarily social services and us giving back to the other extreme of us, getting the hardened criminals, because just doing a scroll through down the images, unfortunately, and this just may be the nature of what crime looks like right now. Predominantly, I see African-American men in the mugshots. And when I'm looking for Hispanics, families of color, Samoan descent, I'd love to see a collaborative neighborhood event playing basketball. And I know you guys do. Unfortunately, those are like 1 in a million, and you get them when you can. And unfortunately, the hardened criminals and the convictions that you said at the county level are what really dominate the news and the media. But I'm not asking y'all to do more work, but I would love just us to influence that narrative a little bit more where we can, however we can, is to tell that story of the collaboration that's happening with all these different faces and looks and ideals right here in this Zoom call. So
I absolutely agree with you, Meredith. I tell the chief probably once a week, my biggest struggle is officers telling me those stories, telling me the good stories, sharing me with what happens. They get in this line of work not because they don't want the attention. They really don't. I can barely get a photo of a couple police officers standing around doing their job, and they quick run and hide because they don't want to be. They don't. That's just not why they do their job. So Luis knows. I send out emails to the police department. Send me positive things. Let me know what's going on. So yes, and if you can, when you hear about these stories, please send them my way. Anyone else watching this video, send me an email, jsim@indeptmo.org. I'd love to see those photos of you interacting with our officers at events. I know right now, yes, everything's a little different, but yeah, send them our way. We'd love to put them out there, share them on our social media because we want to show what is actually happening, some of those positive interactions. So thank you, Meredith.
And Meredith, I want to address something, and I think it kind of speaks to the reason why we're part of this committee talking about diversity and inclusion. You brought up the fact that it seemed like a lot of the mugshots here lately have been of Black males. I want you to know that that's not something that's lost to us, and it's just something that sometimes we just have to. How do I say that? I guess I'm just going to be raw. Sometimes we can't control the fact that the last 5 homicide suspects that we arrested have been Black males, and if you didn't have somebody from the inside like myself telling you that that's just how it worked out, I could see how somebody from the community might be like, man, that looks targeted. It looks like they're specifically just putting young Black men out on social media. I think for me, when I was talking to John about this offline, what is scary to me is we all know that Independence is predominantly a white community. Us minorities, the Hispanics and Blacks are a small number compared to most in Independence. But then to see that the last 5 homicide suspects have all been Black males, it's troubling. But I want everybody to know, and I totally believe in what John's doing, and I fill in for him when he can't do it. We just have to put out what is the news, right? The last 5 people we've arrested that's just who they happen to be. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, please have faith in us that we are not targeting. We are just putting out, and sometimes it just works out that way. I just want you to trust us.
that's the line. And I think that's probably the most invaluable thing that could have been said under the social media conversation is you all happen to be the conduit. And you've already established well before this was the trend. This has been the trend historically for years in Independence and around the area. You want to be the partner, you want to be the law enforcement agency, you have a job to do, but unfortunately right now that happens to be the reality. But that's the narrative I think that the public needs to hear so that onlookers don't think we're trying to create a perception or a generalization or targeting, as you said. So I appreciate that. I think quite a few people would appreciate that.
Just listening to the conversation, I do appreciate the dialogue that's going on and the clarification. The question I have is there a particular procedure on what mugshots get chosen? Is it any murder suspect, then their photo is put up, or is there a particular procedure that's followed, or is it left to just the individual situation and the judgment of the officer putting the post up?
No, it's fortunately, we do not have that many homicides in our city. Any homicide is obviously too many, but I think we are on number 11 now. So if you were to go back, that means the case has been solved. So I think 10 out of 11 right now have been solved for 2020, which is very high numbers. Our detectives do a great job. It's considered a very high clearance rate, what they've had historically. When they get that solved, when charges are filed, we use the recent mugshot of the person who was taken into custody and put it out. I think one or two times we've used a prior mugshot of them when Maybe they were still hospitalized, but had been charged with the crime, and we didn't have that new mugshot. But the news media was bombarding us with getting that mugshot photo so they could put it part of their story. So we have used a previous one, but we don't put that many mugshots on our Facebook page. Now, if you see them as you're scrolling, that means just I'm limited with the amount of content I've been putting on there, and they appear close together. So the most recent mugshot we put on there was August 28th. Prior to that, it was August 17th, July 30th, July 27th, July 25th. So going back, we've had a lot of homicides or independents in the last month and a half. And that's reflected in those mugshots that are put out there. Right. But so to ask how that timeline occurs, sometimes I don't find out internally when charges have been filed. The detectives work so fast. They're working on their probable cause statements. They work with the prosecutor's office. I get an email from the prosecutor's office saying that news release is out. Okay, someone's been charged. That's when I obtain that mugshot, put together that Facebook post that mimics what the prosecutor's office are saying. Sometimes I quote them, but I always put directly what they're saying. I use the same title that they do. Occasionally it's changed if I have to reflect on a previous post we've made. So we had a homicide in a neighborhood. I may mention that 100 block or something. So I'll sometimes update that previous post to let the people in our city following that story, there's some resolution. Someone has been charged. There's not a murderer out there running around killing people. This was something that was investigated. Someone was put in jail, and they're gonna be possibly held accountable depending on what happens in the court system.
Okay, and that answers my question. And I just posed the question just to see what the baseline was, and that it wasn't just left up to the individual decision, because we each have implicit bias that we may carry or harbor unknowingly. But seeming how you all have the procedure of, if it is a murder, then following that procedure, then that makes sense to give a solid baseline to explain the narrative behind the story. So thanks for clearing that up.
And I wanted to ask something. Do you ever, because I don't look at these, I'm not really, into a lot of Facebook and all of that. Do you put in, if it's a familiar, murder or shooting, it's still horrible. But I think that changes the dynamic, that there isn't someone going around just killing people in Independence. And I mean, I know a lot of neighbors, and the 27 years I've been living here, familiar things here happen all the time, real bad, horrible ones. And I think that changes how people are looking at people when they say, oh, that was a family thing. That happened in my family. My daddy put a gun on my brother last week. I don't look at it. Is that put into that narrative, or does it sound like there's just people just running around killing people in Independence? I just wanted to know for myself, since I don't look at these things.
Sure. It really depends on the situation. I definitely never intend to instill any kind of fear when I put that out. I try to keep it pretty basic. We are investigating a homicide in the such and such 100 block. Okay. Officers were called to this location on maybe a disturbance, shots fired. So the call type, I normally say what we are doing about it now. Investigators are conducting an investigation. You may see a crime scene vehicle. Normally there's an action statement as well. We appreciate everyone's cooperation in the neighborhood while we investigate this, or the action may be, if you know anything about this, call the TIPS hotline. We don't try to phrase things, everybody watch out, look out. Now, if we have like an active shooter situation or a barricaded with an armed person, we will sometimes say, please avoid the area, something to that effect, that they know what to do. But we'll say this is an active and open investigation. If you know anything about it, that may give people an idea that it's not solved at that point. It lets them know that we may not have it figured out quite all wrapped up yet. Yeah, we don't try to paint a fear on the post, if that answers your question.
Real quick, back to the comments in the Honolulu or whatever, the Hawaii one. Yeah. If you took like comments off completely from those posts, Is that a violation of what you were speaking to before? Like if there was just no way that anybody could comment on those mugshots?
You mean removing them? No, I've
No,
spoken
I mean
with,
like not even allowing
Right.
comments
Yes,
to
I get you.
happen. Yeah.
I get you. Facebook doesn't allow you to do that. There's a couple loopholes that you can do that, but that's not part of how they use things. They want it to be open dialogue. Now I know Nextdoor, there are options for you not to allow people to talk. I've spoken with Meg Lewis, the city's PIO, about this, and she's spoken with attorneys, and it is our interpretation of the law that for freedom of speech, they should be able to have some sort of dialogue with us, with each other. So the interpretation is we cannot restrict their freedom by limiting those kind of comments. If it is allowed, it's considered a public space at that point.
Okay.
Well, we can have it terms of use. So that's where the gray area is. What terms of use, because it is inconsistent if you see it with different cities, whether it is repetitive comments, vulgarity, personal attacks, obscenities, hate speech, things like that, which is some of that is very subjective. So I really try to stay away from it unless it's something that's I can justify. No, this person is clearly intending to inflict harm on someone. Posting people's personal information on their private email or home address, things like that. I've seen other agencies remove that. We really don't get too much of that on ours. We keep that on file if we do have to hide a comment or something like that, but that's very rarely done. We also don't ever block anyone. We don't use that feature. If that's the case, it would probably be like a spam bot or something like that, where it's not even a real person doing it, and we would document if we had to do that.
Thank you. Thanks.
Any other discussion on this item? And that takes us to the police policies and procedures. Detective Virgil, was that something you were going to go over, or?
No, I'm sorry. I wasn't prepared to do that. And I just haven't been able to be a part of the meeting as much just because I've been busy. So I apologize for that. So I'm sorry. I'm not prepared I haven't gotten over any of that.
That's okay. I wasn't sure if it was going to be you or Major Turner, and it doesn't look like Major Turner's on the line unless he's caller number 1 who's showing up in this meeting. Yeah, I don't think that's him. Okay, so excuse me. With that being said, then we're not going to be able to go over the police policies and procedures since Major Turner isn't available. So we'll just have to push that to the next meeting until he's able to provide us with that update. So then that takes us to item number 6, which is just upcoming items and next steps. I will let you guys know that the subcommittee has met. They have selected a proposal for the RFQ that was issued out. It issued out in 2 rounds. We did receive 2 responses. City staff is going to go ahead and finish up the next steps piece of it. Once that's finished up, then it'll become public information on who was selected. But at this time, it's still a confidential record. So we're not able to really provide too much detail on that until the offer's been extended to the recipient. Did the subcommittee have any other comments or feedback that they wanted to provide regarding that process?
The only thing I would offer, and just thanks to Thad and Helen, I think the process was very smooth. Rich was very helpful and resourceful in walking through the RFQ. I'm kind of glad we only got 2 responses. The 2 we got were well qualified, and we feel very confident with both of those respondents. So looking forward to the process moving forward. And I feel like with both or either, if we were to continue this process either through the task force, or through a brand new commission, or if the diversity and inclusion work would have to continue beyond this first listening session, I feel like one or both of these respondents would be well equipped to kind of orchestrate that and shepherd us through that process. So I'm really feeling comfortable, and I hope Thad and Helen would agree. The folks that submitted are very qualified.
Agreed. Wow, no one says it better than Meredith, so.
And did we have anything else that we needed to discuss for next steps or moving forward? All right, so our next meeting will probably be sometime in November. That would be my guess. Going back a little bit, because I didn't say this, so we're expecting to have a item on our October 19th City Council meeting to approve a contract for the proposal that's selected. And so once that's done, then those next steps will start with the facilitated listening sessions and figuring out what those steps are once we are able to start that process. But I would expect you guys to meet again next month at some point. I'll send out the agenda when that's ready. So, excuse me, other than the facilitated listening sessions, the only other thing that I have on the agenda for that next agenda will be the police policies and procedures, as well as the approval of the minutes from today. All right, anybody have anything else?
Just a final thought. Thanks, committee, for putting in the work to develop the RFP and push the RFP through. And I do trust you all with the process. The only thing I would say is to prepare for next meeting, please look over the police procedures. If you haven't done so, I've kind of been looking through them. And some of them I think would be things that we should be thinking about, what the process, and questions I have, like, what is the process of reviewing the procedures? How often are they supposed to be changed or reviewed? And then, just to try and get a hold, I guess, of some more procedures and possibly different police contracts, so we can understand how those are structured, because I think some of those will dictate beyond the actual procedure to give us more insight as to how they work together, if that makes any sense.
As far as police contracts, are you talking about like our employment, like our job description with the city, or are you talking about like our union contracts with the city? Yes, it would have to be the unions, because there are certain ones like dealing with the fatal response to force, where it says based on, and one part of it says based on the contract or the agreement, and so that gives more insight beyond the actual procedure itself. Okay. I don't know if that's possible. Yeah, honestly, I don't either. I'm not really big into our union contract, what the policies are with that as far as releasing it. But I will. I'm asking so that I can get with Major Turner and try to get with him and make sure that we get what you're wanting. Okay, appreciate that. All I have.
Anybody else? It looks like Helen put something in the chat. She was just echoing what Roman said. She had some questions regarding how often the policies and procedures are updated and reviewed. So she also had that similar question. Did anybody else have any other questions before we adjourn the meeting? All right, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting today. Just keep an eye on your email. I'll send the information you guys need for upcoming meetings and events and things. So let me know if you guys need anything. Have a good day.
All right, thank you, everybody.
You.
For having me.
Bye.